Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of Talks in Class. My name is Jenna. Thank you so much for joining me today for another episode of the podcast. And happy almost Halloween. When this comes out, it will be just a few days before Halloween. And I'm ready. I don't know about everybody else. Are you ready? Do you have your costume in order? Do you know what you're going to be? Are you stocked up on Halloween candy? That's really the question. Because over here, I think we've already gone through at least 2 bags of Halloween candy throughout the month of October. And you know what? We don't really get trick-or-treaters here where we live. And we're also not even going to be home on Halloween. So I don't know. We're not fooling anybody. The Halloween candy that we buy is clearly not for the trick-or-treaters. It's for us, but that's okay. That's what October is for. It's for watching Halloween movies and eating Halloween candy and just general spooky season fun. So I'm excited about Halloween. We do have a fun pop culture inspired costume that we're going to do, which is kind of our thing. We usually do like a couple costume, but it's always something pop culture inspired. What were we last year? Oh, last year we were Paris Hilton and the killer from the 2005 House of Wax movie, which was a little niche. We had to explain to the family who we were supposed to be. This year we are reusing a costume. I think it was our costume from 2021, I want to say, but we didn't go anywhere or do anything, so we didn't feel like it really got the recognition. It didn't get the time to shine that it deserved. So we're going to reuse that. It's a good old classic when it comes to Halloween pop culture or horror pop culture. It's a classic. We're going to do Drew Barrymore and Ghostface from Scream. Whatever your plans are for Halloween, I hope you have a fun costume or at least a lot of candy. I am also a huge advocate of going to the stores the day after Halloween and stocking up on all of the clearance Halloween candy. So other than obviously putting a lot of thought into Halloween candy, not a whole lot new or different going on. I made it back to LA with very little issue, which was good. And we are getting ready to go to the East Coast for a few days. So fingers crossed that we have decent luck with traveling there. I finally sat down and started watching the new season of Emily in Paris. I either have a lot of TV to watch or I have no TV to watch. And right now I have a lot because Real Housewives of New York is back. I personally like the new cast. I know that's a very divisive take, but I like that they rebooted it. Real Housewives of Salt Lake City, which are my favorite housewives by far. They just went to Milwaukee. That was the housewife trip I never knew that I needed. I want a whole season of Lisa Barlow curling. It was amazing. I loved every moment of it. And then I'm catching up on other things. Emily in Paris, I just started watching the new season. And I also have not yet watched the show with Kristen Bell and Adam Brody that every millennial woman was losing their minds over a couple weeks ago. I am going to watch that. I haven't gotten to it yet. So for now, for some reason, I just am overloaded with TV. And, you know, TV, Halloween candy, that's all I have going on right now, apparently. But it's fine. I'll take it. So as always, I will start this episode with my what good happened. And I feel like I have several things that could qualify for what could happen, which is good. But I'm going to use this one because this has been weighing on my mind. I had to shoot branded content for a partnership in public in my very small hometown when I was in Wisconsin visiting my mom. And the thought of filming anything in public makes my skin crawl. I give so much credit to people who go out and film content shamelessly in public. It could never be me. It makes me want to actually crawl into a hole and die. I'm like getting a little anxious thinking about it. But the added layer of having to do it in costume in my hometown where, I mean, everybody knows everybody. So I knew there was a 0% chance I wasn't going to see anybody that I knew. And of course I walked in and somebody that I knew was there. But I did it. It was 3 videos, so it was like a full day video shoot. And I submitted all the content and the brand loved it. I had this fear in the back of my mind that I was gonna have to go back and do it again if there was something that needed to be reshot. Because sometimes that happens. Sometimes you have to reshoot things. Thankfully, they liked it. It was all approved. I do not have to refilm anything. I mean, I'd like to say that I maybe conquered a little bit of my fear of filming in public, but I didn't. I will do it again if I have to, but I never want to do that ever again. And in the theme of Halloween, this week's episode is just a fun trip down memory lane. I'm answering questions from you guys, and we're covering everything from trick-or-treating memories to the best and worst candies to costumes from the 90s. I hope you all enjoy this little Halloween nostalgia Q&A. Obviously, we all know that I love a deep dive. I love digging into trends or pop culture or, researching the history or the background of things that we all remember doing or wearing or watching. And I'm definitely one of those people who can very easily go down a rabbit hole. And I enjoy doing that. I like to dig up as much information as possible about a hyper-specific topic, which you all know because I tend to do that here on the pod. But mailbag episodes like this one are sometimes my favorite episodes because they let me, or I guess sometimes they force me to talk about a bunch of different things. And, even if they're all kind of on the same theme, it gives us a little variety and allows me to jump around. And I also love them because I get to answer specific questions or talk about things that you guys specifically ask, which is so fun because it feels a little bit more interactive. So let's jump right into this Halloween nostalgia themed Q&A. I got a lot of questions about trick-or-treating memories, both in kind of a general sense, but also about some kind of specific trick-or-treating memories. So the first question is kind of a two-part one, and that is, what are some of your favorite trick-or-treating memories, and what was your favorite and least favorite candy to get? And, I don't really know what trick-or-treating is like now because I don't have kids. I guess the areas too where I've lived pretty much my entire adult life don't tend to have as many families with young kids, so I don't see or experience trick-or-treaters much, if at all, now. But I would venture to guess that it's pretty different from when I was a kid, especially after the pandemic. I know things like trunk or treat events became pretty popular. And in general now, I feel like there are all these kind of trick-or-treat or Halloween events that kind of serve the same purpose as trick-or-treating. So it's just not a main event like it was when I was a kid. Like, we only had one night to go trick-or-treating, and I remember looking forward to it for, seriously, weeks leading up to Halloween. It's a kid's dream, if you think about it. Dress up as a ghost or a witch or a superhero or your favorite Disney princess or whatever you want, and run around with your friends while adults just give you heaps of candy. That is a dream. Even for me now, as a fully grown adult, that sounds like a dream. And obviously my favorite thing about trick-or-treating was the candy. Our objectives back then were pretty pure, you know what I mean? Like, we were kids, we wanted candy. But I think also being in such a small town, trick-or-treating for me was kind of how you see it in the movies. Like, when I think about Halloween movies like Hocus Pocus, that trick-or-treating experience was pretty true to my own. And when I was really young, probably until I was like 10, maybe even a little younger. But when I was really young, our parents would go with us, obviously. And then as we got a little older, we would have a meeting spot. We'd go to someone's house, or our parents would drop us off somewhere as kind of our starting point. Not that there was a whole lot of ground to cover in my little town, but then we would just walk from house to house getting candy. Maybe we'd run into other friends along the way and kind of like collect a group of people. Although, unlike the movies, I don't remember much mischief of really any kind happening around Halloween. We didn't do like a mischief. Actually, maybe older kids did do stuff on mischief night, and I just didn't know because I was a child. So I was at home, like in bed. I don't know. But I don't remember that. And then Halloween itself, maybe there were a couple smashed pumpkins, but nothing too concerning. It wasn't, the parents had no issue letting us go trick-or-treating by ourselves, other than being vaguely worried about people putting razor blades in candy because that was like such a thing in the 90s. But for the most part, the parents were not concerned about us trick-or-treating. And we didn't have, there aren't really neighborhoods in my town, I wouldn't say. And we didn't have much for like a downtown. At least we didn't then. Now there's a bunch of stuff. But I do remember going to a couple businesses in town to get candy, like the grocery store and I don't know, probably the gas station where we used to go to rent VHS tapes. And then, of course, there were the houses that were like known for giving out certain things. Those were really important. I feel like every town has these, like the houses that would give multiple pieces of candy. There was one house that would give a little goodie bag and you got a bunch of candy, so that was an important one to hit. Or maybe there was a house that gave away full-size candy bars. I always thought that was like an urban legend because there was nobody in my town that I know of that gave away full-size candy bars. Maybe that came later. Maybe that wasn't a 90s thing. But the best part about trick-or-treating was when you would go home and you would dump out your candy and you would do like your little trade. So you'd like take your candy collecting vessel, which everyone knows was a pillowcase, right? We all used pillowcases to go trick-or-treating. I remember one year my friends and I, our goal was to fill the pillowcase. I mean, a pillowcase is huge. That's actually insane. That would be an absurd amount of candy. But I think that was just the idea behind the pillowcase, at least for me, was it could fit more than one of those traditional little Party City pumpkin Halloween buckets. So anyway, you'd go home and you take your pillowcase, your bucket or whatever, and you dump it out. And then you do a little swap with all of your friends. You know, I'll take your peanut butter M&Ms and I'll take your Almond Joys and your Snickers, and in exchange I'll give you my Smarties and my Tootsie Rolls and whatever you like. And that was the best because you could potentially end up with like a year's supply of candy, and if your friend group had diverse enough candy tastes, you really could like curate it so that that huge mass of candy was stuff that you mostly liked. And I personally was much more of just a general chocolate person than any of the other candy varieties. I mean, really any chocolate. Obviously, Reese's are the best. That's superior. Anything with peanut butter M&Ms. I also love a Crunch Bar, especially a fun-size Crunch Bar. I'm not really sure why. There's just something about a mini Crunch Bar. I love them. I also really loved any variation of lollipop, but especially those caramel apple ones that would kind of stick to the roof of your mouth. They were so good. I loved those. And I really don't know if there were any candies that I just wouldn't eat, that I just didn't want anything to do with. But the worst option has to be any sort of hard candy, in my opinion. I mean, nobody wants that in their trick-or-treat bucket. Like the generic grandma candies. You know what I'm talking about? The little strawberry candies or a butterscotch candy. Although I do appreciate a butterscotch candy now. I don't yet carry them around in my purse, but that might be coming. So that might just mean that I am old. Question 2 is, did you get to wear costumes to school? And then they said a lot of schools now don't allow them for Halloween. And yes, we absolutely did it. It was the 90s. Of course we did. And it was one of my favorite days of the entire school year. My elementary school actually had these cute little classroom parties for Halloween and probably Christmas, maybe Valentine's Day. There were a couple throughout the year, and they happened during the school day. It wasn't an after-school event. It wasn't a weekend event. You actually got to skip learning for the day or for the afternoon and have this little party. So it was so exciting. And for Halloween, we would all wear our costumes to school. Or maybe we brought them to school and changed into them later. I'm not exactly sure, but in the afternoon, that was party time. That was designated party time. So we would have snacks and candy, and I think actually our parents sent snacks with each of us, and we would all put them out for everybody. And these were, I'm talking homemade baked goods. So another thing that definitely wouldn't fly now, but we did it in the 90s. And then after our little classroom party was our Halloween parade, which, as you can imagine, I really took advantage of this opportunity to show off my amazing costumes to everybody. And it was seriously so much fun. The whole day was so much fun. And then the little Halloween party, I think, was at the end of the day so that we were in our costumes and then we could go out trick-or-treating, or maybe we'd go to a friend's house or whatever we were doing that night. And I don't know. I mean, it's sad, but I guess I'm not that surprised that schools don't allow costumes anymore, considering a lot of Halloween costumes include props that are literally weapons, so I probably wouldn't want that in my kids' school either. But looking back, those were some of my most fun, most fond memories of especially elementary school. Question 3, what are your top 5 nostalgic Halloween movies? And this is so hard because there are so many, and it really just depends on my mood. You know, do I want something scary? Do I want something cheesy? Am I looking for a feel-good movie that just has good fall Halloween-y vibes? There's just so many options. So many options. So I guess in terms of Halloween movies that make me feel especially nostalgic, I'm going to go with these as my 5. The Nightmare Before Christmas, which I firmly believe is a Halloween movie, not a Christmas movie, because the vibes are very important and the vibes are Halloween, not Christmas. The Addams Family, which I was obsessed with in the 90s, and I still watch it every year. It's such a fun movie. It's really well done. It's funny, it's fun, and actually, this movie might have been the beginning of my Christina Ricci obsession. This might have kicked it off. So very important, nostalgic Halloween movie. And speaking of Christina Ricci, Casper, obviously, and also, Devon Sawa. Come on, iconic. And the nostalgia in this one is so strong, just all around. It reminds me so strongly of watching it as a kid because I probably watched it like hundreds of times as a kid. And also, very fun fact about Casper, the house that was used for filming in Casper, where Kat lives, is the same house that they used to film the Backstreet Boys' Everybody Backstreet's Back music video, which is like horror themed and a great music video, by the way. Iconic. But you can see the spiral floor in the room where Kat has her Halloween party in Casper, and then you can see the floor again where they do the big dance number in the Backstreet Boys music video. So that's your 90s Halloween-ish trivia of the day. And then The Craft, which you already know how I feel about that after my last episode about witches, but I think for a lot of millennials, this movie really sparked an interest in witches, or at least an interest in attempting to do light as a feather, stiff as a board at every single sleepover that we went to. And then, of course, Hocus Pocus. That has to be number 1 for me. It's the ultimate Halloween nostalgia movie in my eyes, and I think it always will be. The next question is, did you dress up with a group of friends in high school with a theme? And I was really thinking hard about this, and I don't think I ever did a group costume, which is really disappointing to me when I think about it. I'm shocked my friends and I never tried to do a Spice Girls costume. Honestly, maybe we did and I just forgot. I don't think so. I think I would remember. I can't remember a single group costume. And in high school, I definitely didn't. We still put effort into our costumes in high school, kind of. We had parties and stuff, so there was some effort, but it was more of like in a Mean Girls way in high school. We definitely followed the Mean Girls rule about Halloween, and if you don't know what I'm talking about, I will quote Katie Heron. In girl world, Halloween is the one night a year when a girl can dress like a total slut and no other girls can say anything about it. The hardcore girls just wear lingerie and some form of animal ears. And when I tell you guys, I literally did that. Well, no, not literally. Not literally. It was not lingerie. I want to go on the record and say it was not lingerie. But one year I repurposed my dance costume, which I did often, but this particular dance costume was a black latex strapless catsuit. No joke, that's what we wore for our jazz dance routine that year, which was a routine to the Matrix theme song, by the way, because 2003. So I wore that, the latex catsuit, and I just put on a pair of cat ears. And that was my costume. You add the ears and boom, cat. Or maybe I was Catwoman. I don't actually really know what my intention for the costume was. Catwoman would have made more sense because, Catwoman wore latex, and I don't know what kind of actual cat I would be that would be like shiny like that. Maybe one of those hairless cats. I don't know. I don't think I had a really thought out vision for the costume. I just wanted to wear the latex dance costume. So I added animal ears like Mean Girls. And I am very disappointed when I think about the fact that my friends and I never came up with an amazing group costume. There are so many possibilities, and I love a group costume. If you guys haven't caught on yet, I love cheesy things. I think they're so fun. The cheesier, the better. And I really appreciate the extra element of effort that goes into a group costume. I love when I see a whole family in a group themed costume, because 1, they all had to agree on the theme, and then 2, more importantly, they had to assign roles to each person. It's all just very well planned and thought out. And actually, now that I say that about the roles, that is 100% why I'm sure my friends and I never did a Spice Girls costume, because we probably could not agree on who could be Baby Spice and Posh. Those were probably the two that everybody wanted to be. But now Hubs and I do a themed costume every year, so I am making up for this as an adult. Next question, did you carry UNICEF boxes while trick-or-treating? And this is so funny because, to be totally honest, I had entirely forgotten about these boxes until people started asking about them. A lot of people brought these up, but when I think about them now, I remember them, but I remember them in kind of an abstract way. I remember their existence. I remember they were around. I can picture the box in my head. As soon as I read it, the image came to mind instantly. And I remember that people were supposed to put money in them, like change. I don't know. I don't ever remember having one. I don't remember taking it with me trick-or-treating. It's very possible that I did. But I feel like a lot of businesses had them around Halloween. Like I feel like I can picture one sitting at the gas station, again, where I used to rent videotapes. And if you're like me and you don't remember specifics of this UNICEF program, I did a little Googling so I can refresh all of our memories. The UNICEF trick-or-treating program actually began in 1950, and it started as a local event just in Philly. By the 90s, when I was in elementary school, the program had evolved into a school and community-based program that was basically everywhere. Schools would distribute the little orange cardboard boxes to students so they could collect donations. And it had some educational curriculum tied to it so kids could understand what they were raising money for, which is a good idea. I appreciate the idea of giving kids some context for the fundraiser instead of saying like, here, just go ask people for change. And it's still around. It's still around, except during the pandemic, they did away with the little orange boxes, sadly. And now donations are taken through, you guessed it, a QR code, a freaking QR code. This is how I can tell I'm getting old, because if one more person tells me to scan a damn QR code to do something, I don't want to scan a QR code, okay? I don't want to download your app. Let me put a quarter in the meter, or at least let me put my credit card into the meter. Give me a physical thing, and for the love of God, give me a menu. So anyway, that's the story on UNICEF and me and QR codes, and I'm going to go check myself into the home now. Question number 6 is, do you remember popcorn balls? This question threw me for a second, I'm not gonna lie, because as a child of the Midwest in the 90s, I associate popcorn balls entirely with Christmas. Is this a Midwestern thing? I don't know, maybe it was just a thing in my family, but I didn't know until very recently that people would hand out individually wrapped popcorn balls to trick-or-treaters. I definitely don't think I ever got one as a trick-or-treater. I don't remember that being a thing. However, when I was growing up, until probably it probably just stopped recently for all I know, my family had a popcorn ball making party every year around the holidays. And it was this huge family tradition. It was like a massive, massive party. Everyone would go to, I think it's my mom's cousin's house, and all day long, it was all the women in the family. They would just make popcorn balls, just tons of popcorn balls. And I loved them as a kid. If you don't know what it is, it's just like a ball of popcorn and it's held together by this corn syrupy sugar mixture. And I loved helping the adults mix up that mixture. We would put food coloring in it so we could make all different color, combinations of the popcorn balls and make them Christmassy colored. And I don't really know what we did with all of these popcorn balls. I guess we just ate a lot of popcorn. We just ate popcorn balls for the entire month of December. I really don't know. There were probably hundreds of them. So yes, I definitely remember them, but not for Halloween. The next question is another really difficult one. They said, rank these shows: Buffy, The Vampire Diaries, and Charmed. And okay, here's the thing. First of all, I've never seen Vampire Diaries. I'm not even entirely confident that I know what that is. So that's last automatically because I never watched it. But Buffy versus Charmed is really tough for me. And here's why. Both are from the same era. It was the late 90s. And at that point, I was still really a little too young to watch the WB shows. But for some reason, I was obsessed with Dawson's Creek. Obsessed with Dawson's Creek. Okay, could not miss an episode. And I'm really not even sure how that show managed to get on my radar, but I watched it faithfully. I taped it for my friend every week. My friends and I would call each other in the commercials so we could talk about what had happened. And Charmed was on right after Dawson's Creek. So I think I got into Charmed because it was just on, and I just needed a little palate cleanser after Dawson's Creek. Like after all the stress and drama every week of Dawson's Creek, I needed something else to watch. So I just would watch Charmed. But I never really watched the Buffy show back then. I did love the Buffy movie, and I still actually love the Buffy movie. So back then, if I were to choose between Charmed or Buffy, it would be Charmed because I liked it. But watching now, like rewatching Charmed now, it's not great, okay? Not that any of those WB/CW shows are particularly of good quality, but there's a spectrum of ridiculousness of these shows, but there's also a spectrum of fun. So for example, on the ridiculous spectrum, Dawson's Creek is extremely high ridiculous, but it's also kind of low on the fun factor. But then on the other hand, like One Tree Hill is very high ridiculous, like even higher ridiculous, but also very high fun. You know what I mean? So the combination matters. And I think Buffy was just higher on the fun factor. And I think part of that is just the fact that they're teenagers. That just makes it fun. It makes it, I think, more relatable. Even to watch it now, I feel like that makes it more relatable because teenager problems are kind of universal, you know? Plus the fashion on Buffy is just, it's beyond. It's so good. I mean, I loved the fashion on Charmed when I was young, but Buffy, in my opinion, is the best WB show from that era in terms of fashion, for sure. So if you were to ask me now, Buffy does win over Charmed. So I guess my ranking would have to be number 1, Buffy, number 2, Charmed, number 3, sorry, Vampire Diaries. I just don't know anything about that show. So final answer. A few people asked about trick-or-treating as we got older. So someone asked, what age did you stop trick-or-treating and how old is too old? And I'm not sure. I'm not 100% sure. The last year that I really remember clearly going trick-or-treating was probably 6th grade or so. So if I had to guess, I would probably guess that I did some form of trick-or-treating in middle school, but it was probably more like hitting a couple houses and then going to some friend's house to hang out in a basement and call it a party, even though it was just all of the girls sitting on one side of the room and all the boys on the other side of the room just sitting around with our braces and our acne and our bad hair trying to figure out how to talk to each other. Or maybe going to someone's house and freak ourselves out over watching horror movies that we were way too young to be watching but thought made it seem like we were cool. But I don't think it's weird for kids to trick-or-treat in middle school. At least when I was young, it absolutely, I don't think was weird. So up until probably about 13 or so, I do think high school would have felt too old. I think myself, I went through that sort of too cool for school kind of transition around 8th grade. So I would guess maybe I didn't go in 8th grade. And I don't have any idea how this works now because 10-year-olds are buying retinol at Sephora and going viral on TikTok. So it does feel like kids aren't kids very long anymore. When I was a kid, 12 years old was still absolutely a kid. Like I said, 8th grade, when I turned 13, was kind of when I hit that mindset of like, I'm not a kid anymore. But now I feel like 10-year-olds are teenagers. So I don't know. It's very confusing to me. I don't get it. I do think that Halloween used to be one of those things that kind of kept us connected to our youth or kept us connected to our experience as kids a little bit longer. It was something that was childlike, that felt a little bit more acceptable even at, 12 or 13 years old. So I don't know what the appropriate age would be now. I have no concept because everything has changed. And also I was a kid like 30 years ago. So I'm just old and out of touch, I fear. And speaking of how things have changed over the years, the next question is, do you remember homemade Halloween costumes? I feel like nobody does that anymore, but that's all I wore in the 90s. And yeah, me too. Homemade costumes were my jam as a kid. I loved them. And I'm sure I had some store-bought costumes, probably things like Disney princesses and things that were just a little bit harder to DIY. But most of my memories are of the homemade costumes. I remember my mom made me a poodle skirt out of felt. I still remember going to the fabric store and picking out the materials and her showing me like how to cut it out and using the little patterns and sewing the little records or poodle or whatever. I think it was records that were on it. And I think I wore some sort of vintage blouse. And it's crazy because for all of the pictures that I have, for some reason I really don't have any or very many Halloween pictures, or at least I haven't found them. I'm sure they're around somewhere, but I don't know where they are. And I don't remember a lot of my Halloween costumes, at least not in detail. I actually don't have a great memory. I feel like a lot of people assume that I do. I have a lot of pictures. People are always like, how do you remember this stuff so specifically? And sometimes I do just remember, especially when it comes to more pop culture things. But in terms of just everyday life experiences, outfits I wore to school, Halloween costumes, whatever, I reference pictures for all of that. And usually once I see the picture, the memories come right back and it's super specific and I can be like, oh yes, I totally remember that outfit or that event or whatever. But without the pictures, I don't know. I don't remember a lot of specific Halloween costumes that I wore. I do, however, still have my Halloween box, is what I called it, at my mom's, which is just a random collection of items and clothing and accessories that I thought could make good Halloween costumes or good elements for Halloween costumes. I know there's a vintage dress in there that I once wore to dress up as a fairy. I put like wings on. That was in high school and it's still in there. There's just a bunch of, random things. Also, important to note that growing up in the upper Midwest, the homemade costumes were pretty crucial because it was often very, very cold on Halloween, okay? And when it was really cold or even snowing, you basically had three choices. You could somehow work your costume around a heavy winter coat. You could freeze in the name of preserving the integrity of your costume without a coat at all. Or the worst option, you could destroy your vision entirely by putting a coat over your costume, which was absolutely devastating as a kid. So a lot of the times my trick-or-treating costume ended up being different from my planned costume and probably the costume that I wore to school because of the weather. It would end up being some sort of DIY like dog sled racer or something where I could integrate my winter coat. Do you know what would have been perfect for this back in the day? The killer from Urban Legend. You guys remember that movie? The killer just wears a big parka with a fur-lined hood and the hood is up the entire time and just carries some sort of weapon. That would have been great. Kenny from South Park is another great cold weather costume. We really just had to get creative. And of course it wouldn't be a pod episode if I didn't leave you with a list. So today's list, it's also sort of a cop-out because someone asked me about my favorite Halloween TV episode. And since I can't pick just one, I'm gonna leave you with my top 5 Halloween TV episodes from the 90s. Number 5 is the Saved by the Bell murder mystery episode from 1991. And I didn't realize that this show was as old as it is because I watched Saved by the Bell every day after school, but of course they were reruns. I can't count how many times I have seen every single episode of this show, but especially this murder mystery one. It was always one of my favorites. It's an episode where I think it's Lisa wins some sort of radio contest and they go to this murder mystery party at this mansion somewhere, which is just such a classic scenario for a Halloween episode. Of course, like chaos ensues and it's spooky and fun for all. And it's just such a classic, great spooky season Saved by the Bell episode. Number 4 is Sabrina the Teenage Witch, the episode where she clones herself to be in 2 different places at once from the first season of Sabrina in 1996. And as you know from my Witches episode, if you listen to that one, I was obsessed, like capital letters, obsessed with Sabrina. So I remember this so well from the first season. The first season, I think, is especially when I was very dedicated to watching Sabrina. It's not a particularly great storyline. Basically, Sabrina wants to go to a Halloween party at Harvey's, but her aunts make her go to a family party, like in the witch realm. So she clones herself and sends her clone to Harvey's party so that she can go to the family party until she can get there and take over for the clone. But the clone can only say like 3 phrases and, things go bad. I probably taped this episode off of TGIF because I did that a lot and I probably watched it like 1,000 times. So despite it not being the most inventive storyline, it holds a very special Halloween spot in my heart. Number 3 is That 70s Show Halloween episode from 1999, which I also believe is the first, maybe second season. It's very early because it's still in the 90s. where the gang decides to break into their old elementary school and find their permanent records. First of all, it can't be overstated how much I loved that 70s show when I was growing up. It was just so relatable to me as a kid or a teenager in Wisconsin, like them, doing nothing and hanging out in basements. And I just loved it. But this episode is really fun. I think rewatching it was funny as a sitcom, but they did a good job sometimes spoofing things. And this is a good one because it's a great spoof on typical Halloween movie tropes. So instead of ghosts or spirits or whatever, they encounter their permanent records in their old elementary school, and they find out all sorts of scary secrets, including Jackie's middle name and Kelso's real age. Number 2, and this might be shocking that this is number 2 and not number 1, but I promise there's a reason for it. The Boy Meets World Halloween episode from 1998. This episode is an absolute classic and another great spoof, especially the slasher movies that were so popular in the late 90s post-Scream, like I Know What You Did Last Summer. If you haven't seen this episode, first of all, go watch it. But essentially the kids get locked in the school. I think it's during detention and there's a killer on the loose and people start dying, and there are just all of these really great references to 90s kind of popular teen slasher movies, and even a South Park reference, I think. It's really great. It's very well done. But oddly enough, this episode actually was not a Halloween episode. It originally aired in February of 1998, but it's obviously since become synonymous with Halloween. And honestly, it's one of the best sitcom episodes, period, of the 90s, in my opinion. And now number 1, The Simpsons Treehouse of Horror. And I realize that this is also cheating because this is not one episode. But the Treehouse of Horror episodes were always so good. Every year around Halloween, The Simpsons would do an episode called The Treehouse of Horror, and it was just something scary. And it could be anything because they've done everything over, how many years now. They've done classic literature, they've done sci-fi, they've done witches. There's a lot of pop culture parody, which The Simpsons always does so well. And they're just so funny and clever in the way that only The Simpsons can do, right? There's a great Edgar Allan Poe, The Ravens segment for the Treehouse of Horror. The Shining one is a classic where Homer slowly goes insane at this, I think he's at an old hotel, I would assume, but he goes insane because he doesn't have beer or TV. And it's so good. And actually, my high school English teacher, I think about this a lot. My high school English teacher used to always let us watch Treehouse of Horror segments for a lot of our literature unit because, as he said, The Simpsons have an episode on everything. And that was 20 years ago. So by now they have truly done everything. All of these shows are streaming on various platforms, by the way, so you can have yourself a little 90s TV marathon if you would like to. Thank you so much for joining me for this episode. I hope you enjoyed it. It was a fun one. Happy early Halloween. This will come out right before Halloween. If you enjoyed this episode, I always appreciate it if you can share the episode or share the podcast. It also helps tremendously if you rate the show or leave me a review. I'll be back on the next one, so I will talk to you all then. Bye.